Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday, I guess. And it's pretty rainy today. I hope you guys are staying dry. And it's dark out. Like, I have to turn my light on even though I'm recording this at like 9 a.m. or whatever. It's pretty grisly out there today, but appropriate for our topic of Spooktober continuing today. And this is going to be our last week of Spooktober because fortunately October's at an end. The spooky season is going away, and now we're going to go into the boring time of winter until Christmas, and then it gets bleak, and then we finally get spring. So we should enjoy it while it lasts. And we are going to finish up Spooktober by talking about maybe the fourth person type of person, whatever you want to describe that as part of the American horror pantheon, which is the witch, which is in all sorts of stuff, right? And of course, one of the most popular uh, costumes. And that's really a lot of that is impacted specifically by the Wizard of Oz, which, right, the green skin, stuff like that, which was actually newer. That's not how witches used to be depicted, like in the 1800s and stuff like that. So, but since that point, right now, like the Green Witch has basically been a part of American horror lore since the Wizard of Oz, and now it'd be weird not to see a witch with green skin type of thing, right? And this is actually even more interesting because we've had kind of a resurgence of these other idea of witches. So the traditional witch is, of course, a woman usually who lives out on the outskirts of society in some fashion and is able to produce some sort of magical effects, usually through potions and, of course, in the traditional understanding of consorting with the devil. And we also actually see this play out in the Bible, right? We actually have witches mentioned in the Bible, those are interesting, and we'll get to those passages. And witches also pop up at other points in Christian history, namely the Renaissance Reformation period, 1600s, that sort of time, is when witches become a big deal again. And of course, today we have a whole religious movement full of people who call themselves witches, right? Wiccans and stuff like that. This new religious movement. How tied together are all three of these things? Well, we'll talk about that. So, witches, historically, people, usually women, who practice traditional medicine and older kind of religious ritual rites, usually on the outskirts of society in some sense. Not much is really known about them outside of a very brief testimony by people in the Middle Ages and things like that. So a lot of what we know is kind of conjecture and taking things from stories and stuff like that. So, for instance, one of the most famous depictions of witches, which is still used today when we talk about witches, is Macbeth, Shakespeare's play, right? It opens with witches who are all over their cauldron, right, making something double toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble, right? We know that. You might hear that from TV or other things. That's from Macbeth. And so that's kind of where it is. And they're on the outskirts and they tell Macbeth of his future, right? And things like that. So there are these people who are kind of on the outside. And you actually see this in the Bible, right? So it's kind of like these women who would live on the outskirts of society, and you see it in the Bible when Saul he consults with a witch who kind of is like said to be able to bring people back out of the dead, right, to talk to them. And he goes and he wants to talk to Samuel, and so she brings Samuel back, and she's actually stunned it's worked because the Bible doesn't say that witchcraft is actually effective. That's one of the things that's important to note here, is that it's actually not a powerful force. It only works when God wills to work through it, right? And he does this, and Samuel comes up and he yells at Saul for even thinking about consorting with a person like this, right? And it shows that Saul has even fallen more than he has. And so that's the historical thing, right? And then we have where we most know them from, and that's like way back in history. And the way that we think of witches today, the way that we remember them the most, like with the Salem witch trials and stuff, is a 1600s, 1500s, 1400s phenomenon of witch hunting that was happening in Europe. And this kind of happened for all sorts of reasons. Historians are kind of divided on why this is. But this is where we get a really strong association with the devil and witchcraft, right? So when you watch your movies or you see other things, and why people, like some Christian parents, were really scared of Harry Potter, right? It all comes back to this. It's just this association between witches and the devil. Now, like, obviously, in some sense, because of sin and things like that, witchcraft is evil, right? It is of the devil in some respect. But here in these times, it was very specific that they were like either consorting with the devil, right? Talking with the devil, being granted their powers by the devil. And these were usually people, again, women mostly, who were on the outskirts of society. And there's a lot of debate about how these things were done. Like, was it actually genuine? Most people think it was, but like, why were these certain people targeted? That sort of stuff. There's a lot of debate and mystery behind all that. And one of the things I wanted to talk about with this is because we usually look down on people at this time, but I think this is important. C.S. Lewis has a great quote about this in Mere Christianity. And here he's talking about how we think we're so much more moral than people back then. He uses the example of witch hunts because obviously if you have been out there, one of the things people will point to Christianity and say is like, oh, look how evil Christianity is. You guys went and attacked witches or whatever, right? Well, this is what C.S. Lewis has to say, and I'll put it up here on the screen. It says, 300 years ago, people in England were putting witches to death. Was that what you would call the rule of human nature or right conduct? That's like what someone would say. But surely the reason we do not execute witches is that we do not believe that there are such things. If we did, if we really thought that there were people going about who had sold themselves to the devil and received supernatural powers from him in return, and were using these powers to kill their neighbors or drive them mad or bring bad weather, surely we would all agree that if anyone deserved the death penalty, then these filthy quislings did. There is no difference of moral principle here. The difference is simply about matter of fact. It may be a great advance in knowledge not to believe in witches. There's no moral advance in not executing them when you do not think they are there. You would not call a man humane for ceasing to set mouse traps if he did so because he believed there were no mice in his house. Right? So what C.S. Lewis is saying there is he's saying, like it's, this is an advance that we don't do this anymore, but it's not a moral advance, right? It's not that humans have gotten any better. It's just that we've explained why these things are happening. But if you actually put yourselves in the shoes of those people, right, of living at that time, who believed very strongly in the supernatural things in this world, right, and that it could be affected by people like witches, wouldn't you want to get rid of them? The answer is yes, probably, because that's your worldview, right? And that could be, and he doesn't say, that this is morally right or wrong or whatever. He's basically just saying, that this is just a matter of fact, right? People didn't know at the time and things like that. And that's kind of where witches come from and where they get their modern reputation of being these evil, devil consorting people, right? And in recent decades, there's been a rebranding because being a witch became cool again when you have like these occult new religious movements from the 60s and stuff like that, where people would identify as witches. And if you ever go to Salem, which place of the U.S., right? I've been there. It's pretty cool, actually. But you'll run into people who identify as Wiccans and witches and stuff like that, and they'll try and, proselytize to you. It's pretty funny. And it's interesting just being there and seeing how, they describe it, because they have this whole mythos of, witches and things like that, and how they're actually good and stuff like that. And I think you have other shows that it came up. I think there was like Charmed or whatever, which was pretty popular. Other things, right, where you have witches, Hocus Pocus, where you have these things, witches presented in a positive way, Harry Potter, right? And so I don't think it's bad, right? It depends because in actuality, right, there are people who will practice these occult things, and that's really bad. But just the idea of that as a thing could be bad or good because it's all fantasy, right? Because ultimately God is the thing that gives these things power. I'd love to go more in depth into that, but that is way out of the scope of this video, and I'm pretty sure this is too long already. But witches kind of round out our last thing here, right? And serve as a reminder that part of what Halloween represents is God's power over death, right? Because following it is All Saints' Day. And so what it means is that all these scary things out there, these things that can pull you away, right? Ultimately, can do nothing in the face of the power of God. And Halloween is meant to actually laugh at these creatures and tell them that they have no power, and tell death that it has no power. So that's Spooktober. There is no reason to be spooked, though, as a Christian. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, and I will see you on tomorrow, I guess, to give an update on the Bible study. Peace out.